third section of the berry class is going to focus on great grapes. So let's get started. Grapes are a versatile favorite that are popular around the state. They are available in several different kinds, from table grapes to wine grapes to juice grapes, seeded and unseeded. And grapes are really making an entrance in the commercial vineyard industry with both the table and the wine grapes. Many types grow well across Idaho. However, you do need to be selective depending on where you live and how cold it gets. Here's a little bit of information about grapes. You can expect to get about 6 to 10 pounds of grapes per vine per year, and that's after about 3 or 4 years of production. So you have to wait a little bit to get to that amount, but it goes fast. However, the productive lifespan of a grapevine can be 30 plus years, so you really want to choose wisely. This is going to be a grape that's going to be with you for some time. You can see the hardiness really varies from grapes that can tolerate temperatures of only 5 degrees Fahrenheit up to negative 25 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's going to be very important that you pick a variety that is hardy where you live. They have a wide range of pH that they are tolerant of, and I would say that that number could even go up to 8 and 8.5. We have a lot of alkaline soils in the Treasure Valley, and grapes do well there. And you want to make sure that you give each grape at least 5 to 7 feet from its neighbor. So you can do it in a smaller space, and we'll show some ways to do that, but in general, they do want to be spaced pretty far apart. And a fun fact, it takes about 4 pounds of grapes to yield 1 pound of raisins. So that's something to keep in mind if you're into drying and dehydrating. So a little bit more about hardiness. So grapes are, for the most part, hardy in the warmer parts of the state. So if you live around the Lewiston area, the Treasure Valley, a little bit into the Magic Valley, you may be able to grow a wider range of grape varieties than you can if you live in one of the colder areas. But there are some very hardy varieties, and you'll just want to do some research. And we're going to post some variety lists and information for you on the course website. So look at those if you're looking to add some new types to your yard. Some other things we've also seen in some parts of the state where it gets very cold is that gardeners take the vines off of their trellis and actually bury them under mulch each fall, which is kind of a big thing to do, but if you really love grapes and you're willing to put in that work, that can be a way to save them from those freezing temperatures. So training systems. The way that you train your grapes to grow can have an impact on their productivity. It can also make it easier or harder to prune them, to take care of pests and diseases, and also to harvest. So this is the most common training system. This is a double arm cordon system. You can see the trunk has been trained up vertically, probably 4.5 to 5 feet or so, and then 2 canes are allowed to grow on either side, and those are secured to the wire, and that's where most of your fruit production is going to happen each year. This is what that looks like on a real grapevine. You can see that they also have a drip irrigation tube stretched along there that just has some small emitters that water the grape, but it has been trained in that system. So this is what it looks like as that grape starts to grow during the summer. You can see they put on an awful lot of growth over just one season, and all of your grapes are going to be coming off of those spurs or those fruiting areas that you left on the vine. And this is what it looks like in real life, and it can be a little bit overwhelming just how much grape growth can be put on in one season. And if you maybe have moved into a house and you have existing grapes that haven't been cared for a while, you can understand how looking at this can be sort of intimidating. Where do you even begin to prune it? Well, we'll talk about that in just a minute. So another option would be a 4-cane Niffin system. So this is like the one we saw, only you have another set of canes below the top ones. Now this may increase your productivity, though some research has found that you still have about the same number of grapes. They are just differently distributed. The other thing with a system like this is that it can make management a little bit more difficult, and if you live in an area that's prone to powdery mildew and other fungal diseases, there's going to be a lack of airflow in this system, and that can contribute to more disease. Here's a really simple and lesser seen version of a training system. This would be great if you have a very small yard or you only have room for 1 or 2 vines. or you don't want to go to the expense or labor of installing a more complicated trellising system. And this is simply a head-trained vine. So it kind of looks like a donkey tail or a medusa, where it's just one vine that has been allowed to grow multiple lead canes that cascade down, and it's supported by this stake. This is what it can look like. It actually looks like a little tree, but this can be really, really nice. And especially if you have problems with birds or other things, you can just throw a net over the whole thing. It's pretty easy to harvest and work on this plant. And of course, grapevines do well growing on an arbor, which can be very, very attractive, but it is not always your best option as far as pruning, maintenance, pest control, or harvesting. But if you're just looking for a beautiful plant to cover an arbor, and with the added side benefit of having some edible fruit, that can be a great choice. But for just pure productivity, it's not always the best way to go. So a little bit more about pruning grapes. Typically we are pruning to reduce the amount of growth, to shape or replace vines. So every winter or early spring, you have the opportunity to reshape your vines to determine how you want to direct the growth and to get rid of all the pre-season's growth. You can also prune to encourage larger clusters by selectively removing some of the canes. And you might prune to increase airflow, and this might be something that you do later on in the season after the plants have started to grow, that desired effect. And this is about the stage of growth that you want to do that. You can see that the flowers have just finished blooming and the berries are just starting to form. You can pinch that off with your thumb and forefinger or use a pruning shear. Very, very easy technique, and you'll really see a difference in the quality and size of your clusters. So grapes do have a few issues, and we'll talk about these really briefly, and then I will show you a few pictures of what some of these things look like. So number one, herbicide damage is something we see way too often on grape plants, and typically it's either from Roundup or glyphosate or a 2,4-D lawn weed herbicide. So the chemical that's in a lot of the Weed Be Gone or weed and feed products is 2,4-D. And grapes are very susceptible to it, and especially in hot weather or a little bit of breeze, that chemical travels long distances, so you want to really be careful with that. We also see a lot of possibilities of winter kill or bud damage. This can be from an early fall frost that comes, or fall freeze that comes when the tissues are still delicate. It can happen during the winter, and it can even happen in early spring. So you can get everything from just damage to the buds to dieback of all the canes to dieback of the canes and trunk, depending on just the weather pattern. So grapes are not always a guaranteed thing, even in the warmer parts of the state. Sometimes it just happens that way. But if you do have only your canes or your buds die back, the plant will usually recover, but you just lose some of your productive time and maybe, are set back a season or two. We do sometimes see nutrient deficiencies in different parts of the state, depending on what the nutrient contents of our soils are or how fast or efficient those plants are growing and using their nutrients. And powdery mildew is a fungal disease that's very common in all types of grapes, and we do see that in a lot of parts of the state. Leaf miner is a fairly minor insect pest. It can be alarming when you see the damage, but it is mostly cosmetic, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And then some of our primary pests can be wasps and birds. So wasps are attracted to the ripening fruit, especially when the fruit has become damaged or overripe. And birds are, of course, just attracted to the fruit. And wasps are best controlled by harvesting early and not allowing fruit to get overripe or damaged on the canes. And then birds can be controlled often with just using bird netting. So this is what that herbicide damage looks like from 2,4-D or the typical lawn weed killer. The leaves look like they've been put in the dryer. They're shrunken, they're distorted, and this will persist. It won't get better over the course of the season. So if you see this on your grapes and they don't grow out of it, then you can suspect that that may have happened. You can always bring a sample into an extension office with a Master Gardener program or a horticulturist, and they can correctly identify it. But this is really common, and we see it way too often. The other thing is if you do have this damage, It's possible that the plant will recover in the next season, but you don't want to eat any fruit from affected portions. So this is just an example of potassium deficiency. You can see the yellowing around the margins of the leaves. So if you start to see strange leaf patterns and you know that you haven't applied any kind of pesticide, then you might be looking at a nutrient deficiency, and it might be worth it to either do a soil test or to treat your plants with a little bit of a fertilizer and see what happens. Sometimes even just a lot of compost put around the base can help with some of these nutrient issues. And this is powdery mildew, that fungal disease. Very, very common in areas where you've got a period of cool, wet weather followed by warm temperatures and high humidity. It spreads very quickly through the vines. It's coming from the environment. Sometimes it will overwinter on the canes, but usually it's blowing in from somewhere else. Very hard to get rid of once you have it. It's easier to prevent it by pruning your grapes so that there's a lot of airflow, trying to reduce the amount of water that is in the environment, so not using overhead sprinkling, and then using a preventative fungicide. So even sulfur is an organically approved fungicide that will work as a preventative. But once you get powdery mildew, then you're really limited to the types of chemicals that will actually eradicate it. So always better to work on preventing it. And then this is leaf miner. Like I said, it's mostly a cosmetic issue. You can always just remove the affected leaves and get rid of them. It usually won't have an impact on your fruit production. And so that's just the basics of grapes and a few fun tips. We are going to put more information in the course materials if you want to go into grapes in greater detail.